Welcome to Sir David Simmons, His Life in Focus. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. As promised, we are back this week as we continue that autobiographical journey of our retired Chief Justice, whose life continues to be one of service to country and humanity. Sir David introduces this week's episode by speaking about his second attempt at elective politics, the importance of maintaining contact with the ordinary man, or as we sometimes say, the man in the street, and how those strategies, as employed by his team back in 1976 during the St. Philip North by-election, worked to the benefit of the people.
The election, by-election, was declared. And the Sunday that there was to be a nomination of a candidate for the Barbados Labour Party, we had this meeting at the 111 Robert Street, the Labour Party headquarters. They're looking for a candidate. And I volunteered. I volunteered to run, where I had been beaten before by over 2,000 votes, you know. Unknown to me, Bree St. John marked that down, and I'll tell you the story shortly. And people started looking around. You ready? You going back there? Going back in St. Philip North? And as I've said before, St. Philip North was like breaking rocks. So Lindsay Bolden, who lived over by Rice's in St. Philip South, said, something is happening in St. Philip North. David can win the seat. I am supporting him. He's the only person, Lindsay Bolden, Charles Lindsay Bolden, the only one of all of them that Sunday that supported me. I can't blame the others because, I mean, the track record of the party and the individual was not appealing. So anyhow, I just sent forward my name. The next morning, my good friend Fred Gollop called me and said, my God, show up for you. St. John called me, he thinks that you're a madman. I said, what do you mean? He said he thought I was an intelligent fellow, but I would have to be a madman to volunteer to run in St. Philip North again after the beating that I got in 1971. Well, we had a joke about it. Things had been happening in St. Philip that the rest of the party were obviously not aware of. People had started to turn against the Democratic Labour Party, and this business with Maxwell and how he was treated by his own party incensed them. But even before that, something was going on. I had always remained. I had always been there for people. But I had been in Dominica doing a case for a week. And when I came back, Henry said to me, there's some fellas that want to see you, that want you to come and run in St. Philip. This is 1975. They want you to come and run. I said, who are these? Said Pablo Johnson and Joseph Mason. Now, these are two people who 4 years before had sandpapered me and blistered me in St. Philip North in the 1971 election. No want me to come and run. So something must have been going. When I agreed to meet them, and they told me they were sincere and so on, and that they were bringing others who were disenchanted, this was a sea change, a sea change. And so all of this had been going on. Lindsay had been picking it up. I had heard it, but it's difficult when it is being said about you to measure the sincerity. And so people were saying, man, we can give you a chance. And you're not sure if they're truthful and if you can rely on it. But Lindsay was hearing something. Anyhow, there was this movement going on underground in St. Philip. And the result was that we won. Pablo Johnson was the most perceptive political operative that I ever came across. And he understood politics better than many with academic qualifications. And he had a scent for what was appealing to the masses. And even though he was a little bit erratic and eccentric, you had to be able to control him. And I believe in letting people talk. I allowed him to talk. And Pablo would talk and talk and talk, and all of a sudden he would drop a pearl, and I make a note and follow up. You know, small people can offer academics important insights into political behavior. Small people. And that's why, you, as a politician, you must always keep your ears to the ground and listen to the man in the street. Never try to lord it down. Let it come from the man in the street. He's down there. He knows what he's hearing, what he's feeling. And I listened to Pablo, and Pablo was able to convince Tom, as leader of the party, do not focus your campaign on the Barbados Labour Party. Focus on David Simmons, the personality. And it worked. We had, of course, to talk, and we allowed one or two people just to do this, talk about what the Labour Party had done for St. Philip. 6 roads. That complex had 6 roads. Health Centre, Princess Margaret School, Post Office, all of those things. Labour Party built them in the 50s. And we were able to point to those things. But the most important factor in that by-election was unemployment. And I would have to say that I use a little sleight of hand with the Dems. In those days, the electoral list had your number, your name, your date of birth, and in the outside column, occupation. So you can imagine, you're going through and you see, unemployed, 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 unemployed. So you only got to get on a platform. You don't have to read out the person's name. You add up the number of unemployed and say, look here in district, PA1, there are so many unemployed, this government should be ashamed. And you went down the wicket. Okay? So we appeal to particularly the youth who are unemployed. And we call for the development of facilities at 6 roads to provide employment. And when the Dems came and spoke, then Sleepy and Frank Walcott lost their nerve and said insulting things about the young people in church. But the election was over then. And I won it quite comfortably by about 140-something votes. And so 76, February 26, going to the House on the 2nd of March, the Dems were less than charitable. Only the Speaker, Air Hopping, welcomed me on the 2nd of March. The others said not a word. Mr. Barrow, however, on the night of the election, did say to the public of Barbados, this is a great personal victory for David Simmons. And he recognized that the campaign that we had run to focus on me rather than the Labour Party that had been a losing party in St. Philip succeeded. And And he was quite generous to me. But he wasn't there when I went in on the 2nd of March. The other, not a fellow got up and said, well, we're glad to have you, or whatever. It didn't matter. And that was the day that Elliot Motley, if I remember correctly, Elliot Motley resigned that same day as the representative for the city.
I have sent His Honour the Speaker a letter of resignation, and I do not want at this stage to disclose the contents of that letter.
So that then led to, well, possibility of an election in the city. The swing that I was able to achieve against the Dems as a sitting government was of the order of 33%. I don't think that has happened. I think Peter Wickham has said that is a kind of record in the Caribbean. 33% it took for me to win that by election. Now, if you analyze the likely effect of that nationally, I think it was sending a signal. But in May, Mr. Barrow chose to have a by-election in the city. Billy Miller ran. I have to say it. I was very popular at the time. Crowds wanted me every night to be speaking or whatever. And we landed Billy.
I therefore declare Miss Billy Miller duly elected to represent the city of Bridgetown in the House of Assembly.
Well, the writing was on the wall. Although I remember the day I went in the house, you know, on the 2nd of March, Tom said in a speech that, words to the effect, this government, for the little time that you have left as the government of Barbados, words to that effect, so prophetic. And then 1976 was such a beautiful year. In August, we had the budget. Now, when I went in to the opposition, strengthened the opposition by one of them, then bills came. Bills came in May. And I went, it was Tom. We had lost his seat in 71. Tom, Henry, Bolden, Craig, Burton Hines. Yeah, and I made 6. Elliot went, so then myself and Billy. And there was this evening in August when all of a sudden Tom called an urgent meeting of the parliamentary party, the 6 or 7 of us, in the West Wing of Parliament. And we went. And Tom came in. He had an old beat-up briefcase. And he came, and Tom could not help smirking. He could not speak with a straight face. He would always have this smirk, which I think caused some people to think that he was not sincere. But he was sincere. But he had this smirk, and he came smirking. And he said to us, I am only calling you to get your advice and to share some information that I've got. Now, tomorrow is the budget. And the practice was that the Prime Minister delivers the budget, let us say, from 4 to 5. And the next day, the leader of the opposition responds for the same time on television. You could talk for hours after, but you only have the same time on television. So he said, I have some information that Mr. Barry is going to do a short one tomorrow. And he's going to try to get me to respond the same time. So we got angry. We said, what? What? Man, this is unfair. Right? So, you know, he said, don't worry, what are you all worried about? You leave it to me. I have some things in here in this bag. He won't like to hear what I have to say. And trust me, I'll have a way. will have a way of articulating it. And when I give Art the signal, the Art tapping, Art will just zoom in. And we know. No, so Tom is coming with something big. And we're saying, Thomas, what you got there, what you got there? You wait until tomorrow, I can't tell you now, I can't tell you. And he was right, he dare not tell us, because one of us would have been so excited to do foolishness. So he kept it. The next day, so true, Mr. Barr sat down and they called on the leader of the opposition. And Tom got up. I think Mr. Barr's speech was no more than 40 minutes, around 35 minutes, short one. But he had said something about banks. Well, that gave Tom a toehold. So Tom caught on and said, let us talk about the banks. For example, this one that is out in the mid-Atlantic called the Alene Mercantile Bank, a bank that was set up by Sidney Allen, and that was registered, and a lot of work was done on it by Barbadian lawyers and so on. And Tom read out everything. And then he dropped me 2 bombshells. He said, and Mr. Speaker, so I have a check here written. He delivered these checks. And Art tapping and zoomed these checks. So people sitting down in their homes now watching this thing. It was a bombshell.
Eventually, then Prime Minister Errol Barrow, now the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow, set September the 2nd as the date for Barbadians to go to the polls to elect a new government. So David shares experiences of that election campaign, the lessons learned, and his subsequent roles.
Oh, the general election campaign? Perhaps the most exciting time in my political life. As I say, I think they voted me Man of the Year or something. I was quite popular in 1976. So I was all over the island speaking, and I was young, and I had a few fellas that used to ride with me in the moke at night, and we'd go on, there was no breathalyzer, and we would drink a couple of grogs and so on, and move on from one meeting to the next, and I'd go and speak. And what I remember, and I tell people, you can always tell when a government is going to be changed. Wherever we went, there were the large crowds, and people say that crowds can be misleading, but you must wait until the meeting is finished. And you see people don't want to go home. People sit down in the road and say, you be all up at 1 o'clock here, up in Ellerton, at 1:30, barking. And they say, talk, fella, don't go home, talk. People want to hear you. When you see that, that's a sign the government will change. But there were some, Dems made a number of mistakes. It started in my by-election, when the first meeting that we should have held, or that we would have held were it not for what had happened, was to be at St. Philip's Boys' School. And that meeting came off, but then there was another meeting we were to hold up in Church Village. And all of a sudden, 6:30 the evening, when we were setting up, the police came and moved us on. And said, you can't have this meeting here. And we had to move and go up in what is called Webb Hill. And we kept the meeting up there. Now, come in the city, Billy's by-election. Meeting is to be held in the Lower Green. And the police inspector came and said, you can't have this meeting here. So we moved on. We had had permission for the meeting, and just the heavy hand of the law came and ordained that you can't hang about here, move from here. And we went up by Carlisle Car Park, and that became the stomping ground. And what they did to me in Church Village and to Billy in the Lower Green, the people didn't forget. They thought it was high-handed and unfair. And that is why, you know, in these small societies, governments must never be heavy-handed. It's too small to get all this foolishness. Must never be heavy-handed. It will backfire. Yes, an important aspect of that election, the general election I'm speaking of, was what happened to some of us who were as it were, the Young Turks. Now, the Barbados Labour Party manifesto of 1976 that had the rubric, the Great Combination. One of the policies that we enunciated in that manifesto was that we would give backbenchers the opportunity to chair statutory boards. And I remember after the general election, the morning after, Tom called me at home and said, David, listen to me carefully. I wish to thank you for all that you've done for the party and to secure this victory and so on. He was very lavish in his praise. He said, but I am not offering you a ministry, and I'm not offering Johnny a ministry. I think you all have practices to build up. Get yourself a financial base first. You're going to have 5 years. You're popular. Your practices are going to thrive. Make the most of it. I want you to chair the National Housing Corporation. I'm going to give Johnny the IDC. And I said, fine, Tom, thank you very much. I understood it. The other thing he said, but I have to help Ronald and Emmy, meaning Ronald Mapp and Emmy Cox. They were getting pensions as former ministers that were derisory. And Tom was so generous of spirit that he wanted them to serve for a number of years so they could get a better pension. And he did that. And none of us saw anything to worry about with that kind of decision of his. No, so I went to housing, and I had a successful tour of duty, I think, at Housing Corporation. And we did a number of projects, Ferniehurst, parts of Haynesville, Oxnard, Wharton. There's another one down by Ferniehurst, the one in Passage Road, Kensington Lodge, and so on, a number of them. We got a lot of housing done. And you know, the interesting thing about building public housing in those days was that the National Housing Corporation was funded by central government. We got, let us say, $5 million a year or whatever it was. A lot of money in those days. But we had our own staff. We had our own carpenters, masons, plumbers, and whatever. And one of the things I did was to map out a program of activities to show the staff that you're working on Ferniehurst now. When you finish there, we're moving from there, we're going to Wharton or we're going to where. And the staff always knew that they would be in full employment. So I stayed there for 3 years, and then Tom asked me to swap with Ezra. He went to housing and I went to CBC. Until then, 81, and after the 81 election, I went to Sports Council. Between 76, in fact 76 and 85, I continued my private practice. Yeah, and I was able to gradually ease out of the criminal side and do a lot of civil work, for which I had had some training too in England. And I had a very thriving practice and some successful and landmark cases like the Elias and Saheli. That was the first civil appeal that went to the Privy Council for 30 years, and we won it. Mr. Fawzi Elias, who owned Everybody's store. Everybody's on High Street, but then there was Everybody's who was down below on Swan Street, below Barber's Hardware. Right? Now, he had had an agreement with Mrs. or Miss Gloria Saheli, who owned that property in Swan Street. And the agreement was partly in writing and partly oral. And the question was whether we could join a letter from Sir Henry, who had been the lawyer before I was working for Fawzi, whether we could join this letter with another bit of correspondence, or a receipt, yes, and a receipt, to show that the whole thing was referable to the oral agreement that had been made. And the Privy Council upheld us, and we settled the law on that for the Commonwealth, on the joint of documents, yeah. And then, of course, by 94, I had done Cow Williams against Don Blackman. When Don Blackman spoke in the House about redressing imbalances and awarding the Highway 2A contract to Rayside rather than C.O. Williams Construction, which had been the best tenderer. That went to the Privy Council and won that one too. I did not go to the Privy Council. I had prepared the papers and the government changed. The case was set for October and the government changed in September. I became Attorney General and I did not feel that should take off the garb of Attorney General and go and put on the garb of a private practitioner appearing in London. So I asked a chap who had been at university with me, James Gowdy, written a book on judicial review. I asked James to do it. Well, he was working with me on it, but I asked him to go ahead and do it. But Clyde Turney went up. I didn't go. I remained in the cabinet. And we won that one in the Privy Council.
And that decision was a display of good moral leadership and judgment. Sir David Simmons, His Life in Focus, continues next week at the same time. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.